Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. I was desperate to join a new job after my husband and I were both laid off in early 2025. When I was offered a new role, I recognized it would be a step down from my previous position, but the manager and the team seemed fantastic during the interviews. My direct manager, Mike, seemed genuine and supportive, and that impression hasn't changed. However, since Mike was overwhelmed with projects, he assigned me to work with another manager, Grace. I was supposed to be the liaison between my team and Grace's group, but it quickly devolved into Grace micromanaging every aspect of my work. "You need to skip lunch today. This presentation can't wait," she'd demand, or she'd call me late at night. "Why aren't you answering your phone? This is urgent." She'd arbitrarily force me to move or cancel vacation days I'd planned months in advance. The worst was her personal attacks. During one team meeting, she looked me up and down and said, "You're quite large for an Asian person, aren't you?" The list of her offensive comments grew so long that it filled 3 pages in my notes. When I'd stand up to her saying things like, "That's inappropriate and unprofessional," she'd become even more hostile. I only stayed because we desperately needed the income. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in June when she screamed at me over a video call. "How dare you schedule this meeting without Marcus? He's crucial to this project." I had no idea who Marcus was. She'd never mentioned him before. I was already dealing with my mother's terminal illness, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I went to Mike's office in tears and explained everything. He sighed and said, "I'm not surprised. Half her team quit last quarter." He immediately offered to move me to his team directly. I was ecstatic, but the transfer didn't solve the problem. Grace continued sending demanding emails and messages. When I started ignoring them, she stormed over to my desk one morning. "Everyone needs to hear how incompetent you are," she announced loudly. Mike overheard and finally confronted her. "That's enough, Grace. She doesn't report to you anymore." But the harassment continued. After 2 months, I wrote my resignation letter, attached my 3-page list of Grace's offensive comments, and CC'd the entire leadership team. Mike tried to convince me to stay, offering remote work and different projects, but I told him, unless Grace leaves, I can't stay here. Unfortunately, her boss was based in Singapore, and despite multiple HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing changed. So I left, making sure everyone knew exactly why. The next few months were brutal. Some nights we'd share a packet of ramen just to afford my mom's medical bills and funeral expenses. Even after my husband found work, we struggled to catch up on bills. I spent countless hours applying to jobs, sometimes over 20 applications per day. Then last month, I saw an announcement that Alex, a former colleague from my previous company, was joining as the new Chief Operating Officer. I texted him, "Congratulations on the new role. Let me know if you'd like any insights about the company." We had a great catch-up call where I shared my thoughts about potential innovations. Afterward, he surprised me by offering me a position as his Chief of Staff. I accepted immediately. Grace's face during the first all-hands meeting was priceless. All VPs and directors were gathered in the main conference room to welcome Alex. During his introduction speech, he casually mentioned, "And joining my leadership team as Chief of Staff is..." I could see Grace's jaw drop when my name was announced. Now I was 2 levels above her, and I learned that in the 3 months since I'd left, her entire remaining team had resigned. Mike warmly welcomed me back, but Grace sent Alex an email claiming I was an unqualified fraud who had tried to get her fired before. She wrote that I must have lied my way into this position. Alex forwarded me her email asking, "Want to explain this?" I was nervous, but thrilled to set the record straight. Grace had no idea that I'd been a director at Alex's previous company, already 1 level above her position, so the promotion to Chief of Staff wasn't such a stretch. I'd worked closely with Alex for 5 years. During our hour-long discussion, I explained Grace's toxic behavior and its impact on the company. The evidence was compelling. Mike confirmed the complete turnover of her team. My original resignation letter was still in the system, and her former staff eagerly shared numerous hostile emails she'd sent them. Alex didn't hesitate. Grace was terminated that Friday. The next one is an entitled people story. I still remember the exact moment when I pulled into my driveway after a 2-week vacation in Florida. I had been looking forward to sleeping in my own bed after days of hotel mattresses. But when I turned the corner onto my street, I thought I was hallucinating. Where my modest 2-bedroom house once stood was nothing but a pile of rubble and dirt. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, just staring. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. The house I'd owned for 15 years, the house where I'd raised my daughter as a single dad, where I'd nursed my mother through her final days, where every single memory I owned was stored, was completely gone. "This has to be a mistake," I kept mumbling to myself. They demolished the wrong house. This can't be happening. When I finally got out of my car, I just stood there in shock. My legs felt like they might give out. I noticed a few neighbors peeking out their windows, but nobody came out to talk to me. That should have been my first clue something wasn't right. I walked around the perimeter of what used to be my property. My beautiful oak tree that I'd planted when I first moved in, gone. The flower beds my late wife had designed, bulldozed. Everything was just gone. It wasn't until my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came shuffling over that I got any information at all. "Oh dear," she said, wringing her hands. "I was wondering when you'd be back. I tried calling you, but it kept going to voicemail." I had deliberately disconnected during my vacation, my first real break in 5 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mrs. Peterson, what happened to my house?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was that Stevenson fellow next door," she said, pointing to the large colonial-style house that shared a property line with mine. "He had a crew come in about a week ago. Said he had all the permits. I thought it was strange since I knew you weren't selling, but he seemed so sure of himself." "Victor Stevenson." Of course it was him. We'd had issues ever since he moved in 3 years ago. He'd complained about my landscaping, the color of my mailbox, even the fact that I sometimes parked my work truck in my own driveway. He was the president of our neighborhood association and took it way too seriously, even though our development didn't have an actual HOA with any legal authority. I thanked Mrs. Peterson and marched over to Stevenson's house, my shock quickly turning to rage. I pounded on his door until he answered, looking annoyingly calm in his polo shirt and khakis. "Ah, you're back," he said, as if we were discussing the weather. "I was wondering when you'd return." "What the hell did you do to my house?" I demanded. He had the audacity to smile. "I took care of that eyesore you called a home. You should thank me. I've increased property values for the entire street." "You what?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You had no right. That was my house." "Actually," he said, pulling out some papers from a nearby desk, "I had every right. You see, when the development was originally built, there was a covenant that gave the neighboring property owners first right of refusal on abandoned properties. Your house has been sitting empty, so legally I exercised my right." "I was on vacation," I shouted. 2 weeks! That's not abandonment." "The covenant doesn't specify a time frame," he said with a shrug, "and with no one responding to notices, well..." He trailed off, looking smug. I was seething. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," he said. "I have all the paperwork. Everything was done completely by the book." I stormed off and did exactly that. When the police arrived, they took statements, but ultimately told me this was a civil matter. They couldn't arrest Stevenson without evidence of criminal intent, and he had paperwork, forged or manipulated as it might be, that made it look like he had authority. That night I slept in my car. I had nowhere else to go. Everything I owned was gone. My clothes, my family photos, my daughter's childhood artwork, all of it destroyed. I cried for the first time since my wife died, feeling utterly helpless. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office. I needed to see these supposed covenants Stevenson was talking about. After hours of searching through dusty records, I found the original development plans from the 1960s. There was indeed language about abandoned properties, but it required a formal declaration of abandonment by the county, a waiting period of at least 180 days, and multiple notices to the homeowner. None of that had happened. Next, I checked the demolition permit. It existed, but something was off. The address was correct, but the owner's name listed was Stevenson Development LLC, not mine. How had he managed that? I spent the next 3 days gathering evidence, staying with a coworker while I figured out my next steps. I visited the demolition company that had done the work. They seemed genuinely shocked when I told them they'd torn down the wrong house. "We had all the permits," the foreman insisted, showing me their paperwork. "Mr. Stevenson provided everything, said he was developing the whole area into luxury condos." "Did you verify the property ownership?" I asked. The foreman looked uncomfortable. We usually leave that to the client. They're supposed to have all that in order before they call us." I left with copies of all their documentation. The picture was becoming clearer. Stevenson had created a fake company, somehow gotten permits under false pretenses, and deliberately waited until I was away to destroy my house. My next stop was a lawyer's office. I found a property attorney who agreed to take my case, even offering a payment plan when I explained that everything I owned was now under a pile of rubble. "This is one of the most egregious property rights violations I've ever seen," she said, reviewing my evidence. "We're going to sue him for everything he's worth." We filed a civil lawsuit against Stevenson personally and his fake development company for destruction of property, fraud, emotional distress, and a host of other charges. The damages we sought were in the millions, far more than my modest house was worth, but including the value of irreplaceable personal items and punitive damages. While the lawsuit was pending, I stayed with various friends, living out of a suitcase with the few clothes I'd taken on vacation. My daughter, who was away at college, was devastated when I told her what happened. All her childhood mementos were gone. The case moved slowly, as these things do. Stevenson hired an expensive attorney who tried every delay tactic in the book, but we had the facts on our side, and eventually, the judge ordered mediation. During mediation, Stevenson's true motives came out. He'd been trying to buy up properties on our street to combine them for a small condo development. I'd refused to sell when he'd approached me the previous year, offering well below market value. So he'd decided to take matters into his own hands. "You should have just taken the offer," he said during a break when our lawyers were out of the room. "This is prime real estate, and your little rancher was bringing down values." "It was my home," I said, my voice breaking. "Not an investment, not a statistic on your property value spreadsheet. It was where I lived." He just shrugged, as if my loss meant nothing to him. Mediation failed, and we proceeded to trial. It was a grueling process, but finally, after 8 months, we got our day in court. My lawyer presented a devastating case showing how Stevenson had falsified documents, lied to the demolition company, and violated numerous laws and regulations. The smoking gun came when we subpoenaed Stevenson's emails and found messages to a local planning board member, who happened to be his cousin, asking for expedited permit approval without the usual red tape. There were even jokes about how I'd feel coming home to an empty lot. The jury was visibly disgusted. Even Stevenson's expensive lawyer couldn't defend the indefensible. When the verdict came in, I could hardly believe it. The jury awarded me $2.4 million in damages, enough to rebuild my house several times over, plus compensation for all my lost possessions and significant punitive damages. They found that Stevenson had acted with malicious intent to deprive the plaintiff of his property rights, but the victory felt hollow. No amount of money could bring back my family photos, my late wife's jewelry, or the handmade cards my daughter had made me over the years. There was a separate criminal investigation as well, resulting in Stevenson being charged with fraud, forgery, and criminal property damage. He eventually pled guilty to lesser charges and served 6 months in county jail, plus 5 years of probation. I used part of the settlement to buy a new house in a different neighborhood. It's nice enough, but it doesn't feel like home yet. I've tried to replace what I can: furniture, clothes, appliances, but the things that mattered most are gone forever. Stevenson had to sell his house to pay the judgment. His development plans collapsed, and I heard his wife left him. I should feel satisfied with this outcome, but mostly, I just feel tired. I'm still working through the trauma with a therapist, trying to process how someone could be so callous about destroying another person's life. If there's a silver lining, it's that the experience showed me who my real friends are. My coworkers took up a collection to help me get back on my feet. My daughter's college roommates gathered photos they had of her childhood that I could frame. And Mrs. Peterson gave me cuttings from her garden, descendants of plants my wife had shared with her years ago. I'm rebuilding one day at a time, but I'll never forget pulling into my driveway that day and seeing nothing but rubble where my life used to be. I hope no one else ever has to experience that feeling. As for Stevenson, last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in the next town over. Apparently, no one in real estate wants to work with him anymore. It's not enough punishment for what he did, but it's something. Justice was served, but at a cost I never should have had to pay. Update. It's been just over 2 years since I pulled into my driveway to find my house reduced to rubble. A lot has happened since then, and I thought it might help someone else going through property disputes to hear how things turned out. First, let me address the settlement money. After legal fees, I walked away with about $1.8 million. It sounds like a lot, and it is, but rebuilding your entire life from scratch is expensive in ways you'd never imagine. I decided not to rebuild on my old lot. Too many bad memories there. Instead, I bought a house about 20 minutes away in a quiet neighborhood with no HOA and no neighborhood association. It's a little bigger than my old place, with a nice yard and plenty of privacy. The house itself cost $450,000, which is a lot for this area, but I wanted something solid that would last. What surprised me most was how expensive it was to replace all the everyday items you take for granted. From kitchen utensils to towels to clothes to furniture, it adds up fast. I spent nearly $100,000 just furnishing the house and replacing basic necessities. And that doesn't account for the things money can't replace. I set aside $500,000 for my daughter's future. college, a down payment on her first house, whatever she needs. She was hit hard by the loss of her childhood mementos. We've worked together to recreate some of it, reaching out to family friends who might have photos or videos from when she was growing up. It's not the same, but it's something. The criminal case against Stevenson wrapped up about 8 months after the civil judgment. He ended up serving 4 months of his 6-month sentence, getting out early for good behavior. The probation stuck, though, and he has to check in with a probation officer monthly. He also had to complete 500 hours of community service, which I heard he did at a homeless shelter. There's some irony there, considering he made me temporarily homeless. The most satisfying part of the criminal case wasn't the jail time, though. It was the restitution order. On top of the civil judgment, the criminal court ordered Stevenson to pay an additional $150,000 in restitution for the criminal damage. His lawyer tried to argue that the civil judgment covered the damages, but the judge wasn't having it. She said the criminal restitution was for the emotional and psychological damage his actions caused. About 6 months after the judgment, I received a letter from Stevenson's wife, well, ex-wife now. She apologized for what her husband had done and said she had no idea he was planning anything like that. She'd divorced him and was trying to rebuild her own life. I appreciated the gesture, though it didn't change anything. The demolition company didn't get away clean either. They faced significant fines from the county for failing to properly verify property ownership before demolition. They also lost their business license for 6 months, which nearly bankrupted them. I didn't sue them directly. They were just doing the job they were hired to do, even if they should have been more thorough, but they learned a hard lesson. As for the property itself, I sold the empty lot about a year ago to a young couple who wanted to build their first home. I sold it at a fair market price, not trying to make a profit. It felt good to know that new memories would be made there, replacing the painful ones I had. One unexpected outcome was how the neighborhood changed after everything happened. Stevenson's condo development plans fell apart completely when his financial backing disappeared following his conviction, but the publicity from the case brought attention to the area, and property values actually increased as people became interested in the neighborhood. Several of my former neighbors reached out to thank me for inadvertently improving their home values, though I could have done without being the victim of a crime to make it happen. Mrs. Peterson, my elderly neighbor who had tried to warn me, passed away peacefully about a year after everything happened. She left me a small bequest in her will, a collection of garden gnomes she knew I had always complimented when visiting her. They now stand guard in my new garden, a quirky reminder of a kind woman who tried to help. The hardest part of all this wasn't losing the house itself. It was losing the irreplaceable items inside. My late wife's wedding dress that I had kept in a preservation box, the handmade quilt my grandmother had given us as a wedding present, my daughter's first pair of shoes, her kindergarten artwork, the Mother's Day cards she'd made for her mom that I'd kept safe all these years. No amount of money can bring those things back. I've had to learn to live with that loss, to understand that memories exist in our hearts and minds, not just in physical objects. It's been a difficult lesson. But there have been unexpected bright spots too. About 6 months ago, I received a package in the mail from an old high school friend I hadn't spoken to in decades. She had seen my story on the local news and remembered she had photos from our senior year trip that included me and my late wife when we were just dating. Those photos are now framed in my hallway, a piece of history I thought was lost forever. I've also reconnected with family members I had lost touch with. My cousin from Idaho came to visit and brought family albums with photos I'd never seen before. My uncle sent me digital copies of videos from family reunions in the 90s. These gestures meant more to me than any settlement money. As for me personally, I've changed. I'm more cautious now, more careful about documenting everything. I have a home security system with cameras covering every angle of my property. I keep important documents and irreplaceable items in a fireproof safe. I even digitized what photos I've managed to recover and store them in multiple cloud locations. But I've also learned to let go a little, to understand that things are just things, and while they matter, they're not everything. I've redirected some of my settlement money to experiences instead of possessions. My daughter and I took a trip to Europe last summer, something we'd always talked about but never done. We're planning another to Japan next year. I've started volunteering at a local housing rights organization, helping people who are facing eviction or dealing with predatory landlords. It feels good to use my experience to help others, to turn something negative into a positive force. Last week I ran into Stevenson at a gas station. It was the first time I'd seen him since the trial. He looked older, tired. He started to walk away when he saw me, but I called his name. When he turned around, I could see the shame on his face. "I want you to know," I said, "that I'm doing okay, that what you did was terrible, but it didn't break me." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't forgive you. I continued. I don't think I ever will. But I'm not going to let what you did define the rest of my life. I didn't wait for his response. I just got in my car and drove away. For the first time since this all began, I felt truly free of it. So that's where things stand now. I have a new home, new beginnings, and a new perspective on what matters. The legal system worked, even if it took time. Justice was served, even if it couldn't restore everything I lost. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this: document everything. Take pictures of your belongings. Keep records of all communications with neighbors, especially difficult ones. And most importantly, back up your photos and important documents somewhere off-site. You never know when you might come home to find everything gone, but also know that if the worst happens, you can rebuild. It won't be the same. It can never be exactly the same, but you can create something new, something good, something worth fighting for. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Around 2000-2001 in Argentina, I did a network admin course. The guy that taught the course was also an admin in a university, let's call him IT prof, and he told us this story. The department of the university IT prof worked for dealt mostly with philosophy and philosophy-related careers, and it was around 95% female students, mostly high school graduates, but also a lot of people that, once retired, started the career as a hobby. In Argentina, university can be free of charge. In Argentina, IDs are numbered and sequential. So, for instance, if an ID starts with 28 million, you can estimate what year that person was born in. There's only one caveat. Foreign-born people that have gained citizenship get a number that starts with something like 80 million. The dean, let's call him Creepy Dean, at that department was a 55-something old dude with, you guessed it, a pretty creepy behavior. IT prof could access browsing history of every single person in the department, and let's just say his wasn't pretty nor university related. Creepy Dean taught a couple of mid-career courses. He was one of several professors that taught these courses. Every year, each university assigns the students to the courses they ask for and divides them between all available professors. Sometimes this is done by hand, sometimes it's randomized somehow. This is handled by each department. In this case, it was done by a computer program that randomized everything, so each course had a wide array of different students. This program was something that IT prof created, because prior to that, this was done manually. One day, Creepy Dean calls IT prof and tells him, I want in my courses just female students with IDs starting at 35 million or more, get it done. And remarked to IT prof that his job was on the line if he didn't comply, since 95% of the faculty was female. This is a creepy request, but Creepy Dean knew that it wouldn't be as notorious. He could always blame it on chance. And at that time, this behavior was not something that could have gotten Creepy Dean fired, but the university board members wouldn't be too happy about this behavior either. IT prof understood that 35 million or more on the ID was for people that were roughly 21, 22 years old or younger. Creepy Dean wanted some eye candy and who knows what else. But Creepy Dean just said female 35 million or more, so IT prof complied. He assigned all foreign female students with IDs starting 80 million and all older than 65 to Creepy Dean courses. Creepy Dean was furious the first day of classes. He wanted IT prof fired. IT prof told him, I've complied with your request, even though it was weird and something that I'm sure the board members wouldn't be too happy to find out about. IT prof told us Creepy Dean got dishonorably discharged as dean a couple months after this story. There were some speculations, but he never found out exactly why. The next one is an entitled people story. Well, if you read my other posts, you already know that Mia was intelligent, only academically, so naturally she had excellent grades at school, which gave her a certain impunity in the family, and her parents would let her do anything she wanted, even bullying, except consume a certain oregano. This happened in early 2022. We were 18 yo. Here in Argentina, the pandemic restrictions, which were ridiculously long, had recently gone away. As so many times I had introduced Mia and my current best friend, calling her Ale, a few months earlier, but their friendship had already begun to weaken due to Mia's personality, and because Ale began to notice the dislike my aunt had for her. Ale's parents are Bolivian immigrants, and she has Andean facial features and a darker skin tone, which was totally a problem for my aunt. We still hanged out together, though, more than anything, because Ale felt sorry for Mia to a certain point. Mia found an Instagram profile of a girl who was selling brownies with oregano, and she totally wanted to try them, so she asked us if we wanted some too, and we said yes. However, there was a problem, my aunt and uncle. So Mia asked Ale to lend us her house to eat the brownies there, since Ale's mother was not around all day due to work and her father was in Bolivia at the time, and Ale agreed. I told my mom what we were going to do since it was my first time trying oregano, and I always knew I could tell my mom anything. My mom told me it was okay, and I asked her not to say a word to my aunt, which she agreed and just gave me the only one condition to be careful and don't do anything stupid. Ale couldn't say a word to her mother because she probably would end with Ale's life if she knew. So the day arrives, we try the oregano brownies, eat pizza, and have a fun afternoon laughing like seals, eating junk food, and playing video games. Mia and I went back home that night. I was confident that Mia would just go to sleep and it would be the perfect crime, but as Murphy Law goes, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. What happened? My aunt noticed that Mia's eyes were red? Or was it too obvious that Mia was under substances effects by her behavior? No, none of that. In fact, my aunt hadn't noticed anything. It was about to be the perfect crime, but something happened. If you've never tried food with oregano, you have to know it can make your stomach hurt. It's not a big pain, it's tolerable, and we already knew it was normal anyway because we did our research before trying it. It is also normal to feel dizzy, and we knew it. Well, Mia was in bed trying to sleep when she started to feel dizzy and a pain in her stomach, so she had the brilliant idea of running to tell my aunt what we did because she was scared. And before you comment on it, she herself said that it was not such an intense pain that she believed it was a big deal or a threat. The thing is, Mia told my aunt that it was Ailey's idea and that we both, Ailey and I, forced her to try it. She literally lied and pushed us under the bus so she wouldn't get scolded, as if my aunt had ever seriously punished her anyway. The consequences? My aunt went to tell my mom, insisting that I was a bad influence, that Ale was a word I can't repeat here, but that begins with N, and how she was always right to hate her, that I was growing up to be a drug addict, etc. My mom just told her that she already knew what we were doing, and that it had been Mia's idea, but naturally my aunt didn't believe it. My aunt even tried to get the number of Ailey's mom to accuse her, but luckily my mom sent her to fry churros when she demanded it because who knows what would have happened if Ailey's mother had found out. Obviously, Ale and I were furious. Ale stopped talking to her and deleted and blocked her from everywhere, and I didn't talk to her for months. Did this matter to Mia? Not really. She actually said Ale was the toxic one. She even told me I should cut her off. Even my aunt tried to convince me to cut Ale off. Obviously, I didn't, and they mocked me and said that time would prove them right and that I would regret to be her friend. It's been more than 3 years and I still don't regret it. Anyway, thank you for watching.